Hey everyone, welcome back to part two of my conversation with Eileen. I asked her, how do you leverage your multi ethnic heritage? It's something that's always been on my mind. I was surprised by her answers, and it was so much insight on how her Japanese culture as well as her Canadian influences come together as one, not to mention the UK. In this week's episode, she speaks about her journey with why she started the East Asian Girl Gang. She also shared how her parents influenced and shaped her way of thinking with this mindset of ganbate, which is about moving forward, keep going, the expression of encouragement. And what really surprised me in this whole conversation, or what I enjoyed the most, was when she described what is happiness for her and how her parents shared with her that it's the art of not losing connection with others, having the attitude of ganbate plus curiosity. So here is my suggestion. Grab a paper and pen for this week's conversation. Write down all the things that stood out for you that are worthy of reflection. Enjoy this week's conversation. Eileen, so you help all this, you've overcome, you've leveraged also your heritage. How have you supported and with East, and we're going to go into East Asian Girl Gang. How do you help that? Because that's leveraging as well.
So basically it's a community. I'm not trying to in any way monetize it. It's really meant to be a friendship group. And I think certainly on my website, it says the reason I started it was I've lived in the UK now for many decades, and I'm from Vancouver, which has a very large East Asian population. So in Vancouver, I still have lots of lovely friends. But my two best friends, when I thought about it, are both Chinese, actually, ethnically Chinese, CBCs, Canadian-born Chinese. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It's because we share a similar background. We share, they're Chinese, I'm Japanese, but we share a sort of ethnic background around food, around culture, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought what's very strange is I've lived in England a really long time and I've got lovely friends that I adore, but I don't have a single East Asian friend. So it's just, I just thought that was weird. And that all came to the fore when we all had a bit more time to think during lockdown. And there was also this kind of 1400% spike in anti-Asian hate crime.
You published something a couple of days ago as well.
Yes, because there's been, I'll get into that a bit later, but there's been an interesting paper published around that. And so I think a lot of people, very similarly to me, so I'm not going to say I'm special in any way, who had an East Asian background thought, this isn't right. This is not great. We generally stay quiet and stay in our boxes, and we don't wave flags or march in the street, or we don't make trouble. We just get our head down. But no, this is wrong. And especially I think younger East Asian people with East Asian heritage, the people in those communities, because there are lots of different ones, but people in those communities were like, we're not going to put up with it. Our parents had to put up with this, but we're not going to put up with this. We're going to do something about it. So a whole load of fantastic groups came up. One is Voice EC, one is the Asian Leadership Collective, BC, EC Syst. There are quite a few of them now, and they're all kind of coalescing, which is really nice because there's a lot of crossover. Because actually, as a minority group in this country, because it's quite fractured, there aren't large areas where there's just a huge population of East Asian people. They tend to be spread out around the country. They, geographically were quite fractured as well. So this allowed us online and now more in person to kind of marshal our resources and chat to each other and find overlap and find community. And so my group isn't about, because some people are doing consulting for companies, Asian Leadership Collective help Waitrose do their new take on Japanese food, but mine is much more just about finding a space, just finding, the shared heritage that overlaps, doing fun things together. We're doing a Korean food crawl in New Malden in about 10 days, which is really fun. And we're all different ages, doing all different sectors, and people dip in and out at will, which is really nice. But it's a community, and that's what I wanted to create. And you're right, leveraging that is important because until now, we have been a very invisible group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're very underrepresented in terms of forward-facing roles, CEOs, politicians. I think there are only two Asian politicians, MPs at the moment. So, kind of visibly, we have been invisible, but things are changing. You know, Crazy Rich Asians. After that came out, that kind of was the beginning of this flood of media. So there's that film with Michelle Yeoh, which has been huge. And if you just click on, I watched something the other day, which I have to recommend. I've no interest in it, but it was brilliant, called Drops of God, which is a French-Japanese production.
Drops of God.
Oh God, yeah, on Apple TV. And I absolutely loved it. It just encapsulated France for me. I lived there for a few years, and then Japan, the different cultures and the way the different cultures approach the same problem. It's absolutely brilliant. So I think there's more and more visibility. There's more and more acceptance that there's visibility, but we're still at the beginning stages.
Yeah, I have to say, when people hear about DE and I sometimes I do roll my eyes. I'm not going to say no, because it's a framework. There's a lot of tick in the boxing going on. And then there's also so many forgotten communities. And I think, look, diversity is a way of life. It's not something separate. To me, it's not separate. But when you enter the space of DE and I, either I'm feeling torn to be woman or it's torn to be on race. Mm-hmm. And I just think as you can imagine, we are some of us who are 3-4 cultures, you're neither here nor there, nor you are a diverse being. It's not something you are separate. It's just, you're a collection of all these things. So when I see that we don't speak about the complexities, I'm always concerned. I'm always thinking, do we see the bigger picture sometimes? But you do a lot of work also for businesses. I know you've been actively involved with the government also.
Not exactly.
Oh, you went to do a talk? You went to do a talk?
I went to something really important. So it was really fabulous. It was Houses of Parliament. So Sarah Owens, who's an MP, was launching a paper about anti-Asian hate crime since the beginning of COVID, with some recommendations. And what's interesting is, if you look at, we always get these senses. Even I live in Islington, and every time you do anything, they ask you to say, what is your ethnic background? So there's all sorts, and then there's Asian, and then there's Asian Chinese, and then there's Asian other. So I am Asian other. So unless you're Asian Chinese, we don't get picked out. And what we know now today in 2024 is data is king and queen in everything. If you don't have data, you can't make recommendations. You can't understand what's going on. So they've tried to actually drill down on the numbers, try and investigate how much crime is going on, how people feel about crime, if something has happened to them, do they report it, do they not, and what can be done to help those people and help these communities. So it was really important, and it was quite moving actually to be in this committee room in the Palace of Westminster, walking through these amazing, the hallowed halls of Westminster. But it really is that. It's incredibly historical. And then going into this committee room and having a room full of many, many people who look like me was really moving. And it made me, whatever the bad things you can say about society, I felt really proud to be in a country where whatever the problems, people are trying to look at them, and you're allowed to look at them. You're allowed to investigate them. You're allowed to highlight them, and you're allowed to try and do something about them. Whether something gets done or not is kind of the next stage. But the fact that you can actually get people interested and have the government hopefully get interested and I think the research was sponsored by JP Morgan. I hope I get that right. Sorry if I don't, whoever sponsored it. But, the fact that a large private company is also interested in investing in that, I think those are all really good signs, really positive signs.
Definitely. But then, like I said, you're quite involved. A lot of people can choose not to get involved, and changing that narrative and opening up that awareness is I think it's very interesting, and it's crucial. Like I said, it's not just this side, it's not just that side. It's being able to break down the big collection and saying, look, it's much more than that. And there is a universal way to it. is what I get at, or what I hear from with you.
Absolutely, and sorry, just to interrupt in. So yes, off the back of that, I become a trustee of a charity which supports women from East and Southeast Asian backgrounds called SIWA. It was originally called Gabriella Safe Haven. Yeah, so that's for me also another learning experience. Really, I found it so enjoyable meeting people. I'm just at the beginning of the journey, but that's been, fantastic. I'm doing a talk, actually another talk next week for school, so for young people next week, and I'm also involved in doing some writing and helping to organise an event that's happening next Monday. I'll give a shout out to
Peril Awareness.
The Young Peril Awareness Day, exactly.
Yes.
So that's really just about it's to give a sort of historical context to East and Southeast and East Asian communities in this country, which goes back a long time. And I found out stuff. I wrote a piece about these two young Japanese sailors, Christopher and Cosmos, who came over in 1587. I mean, it's crazy that they're the first recorded Japanese people who lived in London, and that was half a millennia ago. So there is lots of history. It just hasn't been revealed, and so it should be an interesting day next Monday. I
heard that. I did get the ticket because I would love to go. Your quotes really grabbed my attention, and I was fascinated by what you wrote. I just thought there was lost history as well, because we had in my culture, there's a lot of lost history. So I'm fascinated by it, how we are in the stages of almost like restoring it, and that's so beautiful. So that's why I got very interested in it as well. And I'm like, I wish we were sharing this out next week, and then so everybody can hear and go for it as well. But it's something. It looks like something that's going to be more long term, right?
Yes, they're hoping to do it every year. So it's been run by a group called Voice EC, so Voice East Southeast Asian, and they've pulled in lots of people to try and help, which has been great. And they're hoping to do it every year, just as it's actually meant to be, possibly the name of it feels less uplifting, but it is actually meant to be an uplifting experience for those people from those cultures or who have some tie to that ethnic background, to learn more about their cultures in this country. And for those people who aren't from those communities, to learn something, just learn something about those communities and part of, honestly, what is the rich tapestry of this country. And there's so many bits to it. And it's exciting to find out about it in the same way that I have a friend, I'm hopefully going to go see it soon. In fact, I think my husband's seeing it today, is a show on at the British Museum, which is about Black music in this country for the last 500 years. Not something that's immediately obvious to anybody, but there has been a history of Black music in this country for 500 years. So in a similar vein, to kind of get, let some light pour in on all these forgotten histories so that people can learn from them, enjoy them, and celebrate the fact that we are a country. I'd say we're more of a melting pot now, not really a mosaic. I think there are all these strands that go together and combine together, and I think it's very lovely.
Like colors that blend together and just become one color.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of saying it. With all these experiences, with all these wonderful parts on your journey, what is the one thing that strikes you, that surprises you about you?
Oh, well, that is an interesting question. So I think actually I'm going to big up my parents here. And I'm going to say that they both lived to a pretty great age, especially my father, who lived until he was 99. And I'd say that the thing that I guess maybe it's not a surprise to me, but that I've enjoyed learning, is that the key to having a happy life, I mean, if you can put food on your table and you have a roof over your head and you have safety, aside from, those kind of hopefully basic things that we all would like to have in our lives, the one thing that makes you the happiest is not losing interest in other people. And by not losing interest, I mean always being the one to ask questions and always being the one to care enough to ask questions. So my mother was always a very caring, kind person. She always thought about other people. My father was a very curious person, and literally, I'd say to the day he died, if he met you, he'd say, "Oh, Kirti, that's an unusual name. Where's that from? Tell me about you." And I think the older that I get, the more I realize that there is an unfortunate tendency as you get older to say, "Well, I've done it all. Mm-hmm. I know everything. I know better than you. You're just a young whippersnapper. So I'll tell you what to do, and I'll tell you about my life." But in fact, to gain happiness, and I've really learned this through the last 7 years, is you need to find out about other people. You need to find out what they've done and what they think and what they're planning to do, because then your life gets much bigger. Instead of shrinking down, it starts expanding. At any age, your life can expand. At any age, your life can grow. At any age, our brains can grow. My dad, as I said, was a neurologist. And when he was a young student, they were told that when your brain cells die, they're gone. That's it forever. You can't replace them. It wasn't until halfway through his career that new evidence came out that that's not true. Your brain, your synapses can regrow. You can grow new connections in your brain at all stages of life. And I thought that's such a hopeful, what hopeful evidence for us that whatever stage of life we're at, we can still grow as people. And so that to me has been maybe not a surprise, but a confirmation that to stay happy, to have a good life, we need to always be outward looking, and we need to be thinking about other people. We shouldn't be inward looking and just thinking about ourselves. So sorry if that's a bit boring, but I really...
No, I don't think it's boring at all. I don't think the audience will find it boring. Probably it's also, in fact, I would say it's really important to bring that back. What you're really sharing also is the power of connection, right? You started off, even you said, I could have been quiet. I didn't want to step out, but you've also now bloomed by doing public speaking. You've grown from doing your own business. You've taken uncomfortable steps every step of the way. And so to me, I don't think that's boring. I think that is sometimes a great reminder. That's personally, to step out of your zone, listen to something completely different.
Yeah, so absolutely. So you would have loved meeting my dad. He would love meeting you. Because he never lost that curiosity, which I think we all have as children. We're naturally, children are naturally curious because everything is new to them. As we get older, there are less new things for us to explore unless we challenge ourselves to find them. And I think it's up to us to challenge ourselves to find those things which do make us a bit uncomfortable, but can also bring us joy. And those things that don't, we can say, "I tried it, it didn't work out." That's fine too. But never to lose that feeling that there are things out there that we don't know, we haven't seen, we haven't tried, we haven't tasted, we haven't experienced, and we don't know about. And there's so many people, there are billions of people in this world. How fantastic to be able to meet, even just a tiny amount of them, and learn about the human experience. It's really important, especially if we ever hope that we can have peace in this world. We need to know each other.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially also with the rise of AI and technology. Everyone's leaning into, I like AI as a task oriented, but from a connection to connection, sometimes I do have my concerns around the ethics around it. And how is that going to make us more isolated than before? I don't know what your views are on that.
I agree with you. I think it's incredibly helpful as a helpmate. So if you need a resource like, what are the 3 best resources for a certain topic? Easier than using Google when you've got to search through loads of stuff. But also the more technical we get, for some of us who are not natural techie people, I think we'll use it as a tool and that will be it. But there are some people who are by nature introverted. They might find it more difficult to interact with other people. And technology gives them an opportunity to put a wall or some kind of, even if it's just a very thin sheet between themselves and other people. And I agree with you that I think there's a danger, particularly for young people, to be able to hide themselves away and not have to interact. I don't know what will happen ultimately. We don't know because we don't know what the future is going to bring. But AI certainly seems like it is changing the world already. It's going to change it even more.
I find that as it keeps changing, I keep coming back to the importance of human connection. It's almost telling me that while AI grows, the value for human connection is much more precious. I know in the Asian culture, there's always about the collective thinking, the community thinking. And I feel that's part of my root strand just calls to that and says, while this is happening, fantastic, but we also have to come back to taking care of ourselves. And you spoke about belonging in some of your posts as well. And I see how that's important. How is that going to shape you moving forward now? With all that you keep gaining, with all your curiosities?
Oh, I don't know. I hope it will lead me to be able to meet. I mean, it's led me to meet all sorts of interesting people, including you, to have new experiences. And it's led me to try new things. I've also, because during the time when we were really building up Cucumber and it was so busy, I generally am quite a creative person. I like to work with my hands. I used to have an accessory business where I made bags and accessories. And I wasn't really able to do any of that creativity. So I'm slowly getting back into that. And that's been a real treat. I really love things like it. Sounds very Victorian. I love embroidering. I love crochet. I'm learning to become a better knitter, and I like experimenting with all those textiles, making textiles. So that's actually been fantastic, having the time to do those creative things, because creativity always takes time. You need an hour to sort of get started, get into the mood. Then you're creative, and then you need time to tidy up and think about. So it always takes much longer. You can't just sit down and bang out like half an hour of creativity. You've got to set aside a morning or an afternoon.
I don't know if you have it. I taught myself these little things just so I could dabble in them. And I ended up loving how to embroidery, which I never thought I would do that. So I totally understand when you say you got to make time, but don't you find you get lost in that time? Just going with it somewhere.
Exactly, and it's fabulous. But then if you're also trying to run a business or do something, you've got young kids, there's also the guilt element comes in. Oh my goodness, I've spent 3 hours crocheting. I think there's an accompanying guilt to it, because unless I guess maybe for me, unless there's a purpose to the end of it, it feels a bit self-indulgent. It's just like, I love to read, but I generally never read a book during the day, because I know if I start, I can't stop. And so I have to be purposeful, and so I can only read in the evening before I go to bed, because that's a relaxing time. But during the day, no reading books, because it's a distraction.
Do you think being purposeful is much healthier than being busy?
I think it's much better than just being busy, because you could be busy without being purposeful. But I think purpose is important for human beings. I think that we like to feel that we're accomplishing something. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's meaningful to you, it can be a painting, it can be a building, it can be an algorithm. Having some kind of goal, I think, is helpful. I think it is definitely for me, and maybe that is also my upbringing. Mm-hmm. It probably also is my upbringing that, don't waste your time. You need to always be productive. Mm-hmm. Be a productive member of society, be purposeful, don't waste your time. So maybe there's also that mantra going on in my head.
I was going to ask you, because you know how they had, there was a point in time, everyone's talking about the Japanese ikigai, and there's kaizen. So they always talk about it, and I think, okay, right. Let me go to the source. I'm here with the source now, because sometimes I'm like, because I've seen it done to yoga. It gets culturally appropriated and a lot of strands go missing. And I go, no, this is, so I'm always like, okay, let me go to the source of things. Tell me about that. Being purposeful. How much is that part of the culture?
I think I'm Canadian more than I'm Japanese.
Okay.
So I have to speak from my own experience, which is being a Japanese looking person, genetically Japanese, growing up in a Western society. But I do think that there's this, so in Japan, there's a word, if you say ganbatte, so if anything's going wrong, and you've got to struggle through something, people won't say, oh, tough luck, take it easy. They'll be like, ganbatte, like, you can do it, like, it's okay, like, be strong, you can push through. And it's all about pushing through and being strong and not giving up and not taking the easy way out. I think the idea of duty duty to your parents, to your family, to society, to your body. That is much more paramount in a way that it isn't in many Western cultures, because, it's summed up by Boris Johnson in his "We live in the buccaneering spirit." There is a buccaneering spirit in this country, where people will say, "I have an idea and I'm going to make it work, and it's my," it's not about duty to others. It's about buccaneer, just like getting out there and doing so. Whereas I think in East Asian cultures, it's a lot more like, I have a great idea, but I need to make sure that mum and dad think it's a good idea, my teachers and my professor. And will it be bad for society? I'm not sure. So I think it does feel like there are so many more quite connected strands that people even subconsciously think through before doing anything.
Yeah.
That definitely plays a role, I think.
What do you feel like? I love how you said the Canadian side of me and the Japanese. I say that too. I'm like, the South Asian side of me says this, and because you are. I think we are in a very lucky position to be able to search for the best possible solution, but it comes back to that sense of duty to others. So for me, the duty to others, and it's exactly what you're saying, you are weighing up from, based on your different cultures, what's the best avenue to go. And do you feel that has always been your North Star? Has it always helped you?
I think probably, and without even realizing it, because when you're young, you are who you are. You don't really question that. You don't know how to be any different than when you are. As you get old, you can think, oh, okay, I understand that. The reason I do this thing is because probably mum always said, the reason I do this is because dad always said, or, so you can investigate your motivations behind your actions a bit more objectively when you get older. Whereas when I don't want to sound patronizing to young people. I think you're trying to figure out so much stuff when you're younger. You don't have time to investigate. You're just trying to explore like what you're going to be. Whereas when you become who you are, then you can investigate backward and think, oh, okay, I understand the roots of those actions, which is why a lot of people go into therapy and stuff, don't they? Because they want to figure out the roots of their motivations and their actions in their lives. But I think definitely so much of what I think and what I do is tied into how I was brought up and the ambitions that were instilled in me and the things that I was told. And, my parents both they're older, they were the war generation, they had very different experiences. My mum, my mum grew up in Canada, which the yellow peril was real. And a lot of her family were interned in internment camps and they lost everything. She luckily didn't have that, but she had some deeply unpleasant experiences as a young woman. And for her, racism was just the default nature. They were the hated people of the time, the Japanese. They were the enemy. And then my dad, very different, because he was Japanese growing up in Japan. He didn't experience any racism. He was the majority person. And he also grew up in a very well-off educated elite, what they would call, imperial elite family pre-war. But then he also, when he moved, ultimately emigrated to Canada because of my mum. He met her there when he was doing further study, decided to marry. They decided to stay in Canada. He then experienced racism. So that was different, and it was interesting to see the different ways they got through it. But for both of them, it all goes back to that, what I say, gambate. It's like whatever happens, you just push through, and you have a plan and you have a goal.
Talking about that, can I ask you one question? I've experienced this, so I would love to hear your insight on it. My parents, when they came over to Curacao, so my mom was born in Nigeria, but then went back at a young age to India. And India is not really their home country because they were refugees after the partition, right? My father is firstborn outside of the country. So I would say firstborn refugee, first immigrant in India. Then they got married, moved to Curacao. So it's a whole new life when they're 20. Yeah. They had 4 children, but what they ended up doing was we were learning 4 languages at the same time. So they gave up teaching us their home language, which was Sindhi and Hindi. And today I don't blame them because I understand why they did that. But I do feel like that lost strand did play a role. Did your parents ever did they ever choose to give up parts of that so that you could fit in?
No, I don't think so. So, two things. One is where I grew up. My dad was a professor, so we lived very close to university in this area, which is, most universities, even back in the day, tended to be liberal enclaves, and so it was an area where I certainly experienced very little racism, very little. My mother experienced a lot more as an adult. She was much more aware of it, and she was very sensitized to it. And not to be fair, but I mean, the reality is that the first house they bought relatively near the university, the next door neighbor got up a petition to try and get them off the street because of their race. And then my dad was like, and it didn't work. I mean, nobody signed it, which is great. And that was only, 25 years after the war. And then when they moved to the house that they ultimately lived in for a very long time, when my dad told somebody that he'd bought this house on the University Hill, this man said, but who was actually wasn't white, he was black, very unusually for Vancouver because there's a very small, even now, black population. He said, well, you can't buy a house there. And my dad said, why? And he said, because you're Japanese. And he said, but I just bought it. But interestingly, the person who sold it to him was Jewish. So I think that actually was not a deliberate, but it was like, I'm going to sell to whoever I want. I'm not going to worry about what other people think. And a couple of people moved away after we moved in.
Do you think that the shared traumas that we had, even though very different from different wars, those shared traumas does draw people together in a very different way?
I think so, because even if it's an unspoken understanding that, and you and I, even though our backgrounds are so different countries, different languages, different cultures, what we share is a slightly fractured experience, which is sometimes I feel Canadian, sometimes I feel British, sometimes I feel Japanese, but it's quite often I'll be in Canada and I'll feel really British, or if I'm here, I'll feel like I'm acting really Canadian, and we're hoping to go to Japan next year. I know I'm going to feel so Western. I'll be so much the fish out of water. Just everything about me will scream, you're not Japanese. And so it's almost this feeling that wherever you are, you're not quite
there. Fit in.
Yeah. There's always something a little bit different. And so I marvel at people who, and there's a bit of envy there too, who grow up somewhere, feel very embedded and very comfortable in that culture, and they never leave it. And so on the one hand, you can feel sorry that they've never experienced anything different. On the other hand, there's a comfort to that too, which neither you nor I have ever had.
No, the idea of finding home I'm like, there is no such thing for me. Because it's true. I go to India and I'm like, yep, don't belong there. I come here, I'm like, no, don't belong here. Go to Netherlands, no, don't belong. I'm like, come on. And everyone's like, so where is your home? I'm like, I wish you would stop asking that question, But then it's exactly that. When I look at the opposite side and I see the comfort that comes with it, I go, oh, that's so nice. It's like, but the grass is always greener on the other side, I always say.
Exactly. It is. And we've had amazing experience. We've had the privilege of experiencing different cultures and understanding different languages and understanding. And for me, one of the biggest gaps to bridge was moving from Canada to the UK. I thought that would be really straightforward because of the language. Well, because the culture is so different. It's such a different culture. And it was quite a shock for me to understand that. Even the accents I found impenetrable. When my husband first took me to some street market, I couldn't understand what anybody was saying to me. English is my first language. People talk so quickly. They had really strong accents, and the humor is completely different. Even the way that people operate in terms of socially, Canadians are very open. They might be insincere, but they're very friendly and open and welcoming. And English people are much more reserved and much more, not suspicious, but they're not going to welcome you into the fold until they really know who you are. And so that takes a bit of getting used to.
I find it's a tough culture to get into. Because when you already feel, first of all, you become very aware how
how you are that nail sticking out. You feel it. You really do feel it. And you're like, okay. And then all of a sudden, at one point, I saw my accent switching and I went, no, 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 no. Bring it back. Bring it back. I was like, I don't want, because people would tell me, oh, you're American. And they do this thing with their face. And I go, first of all, I'm not American, but that face you just did, I don't know how I'm supposed to work with it. And then you have to stay calm, collected. And then you say, okay, let's go through this. And then I find that now I feel like I have to put on a different layer. So I don't know if you have that. So when I go back to Curacao, there's a different layer. If I go to come here, there's a different layer. When I go to India, there's a different layer. Do you have that?
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's not even a different layer. It's sort of like a shift. So just because everything's different. So when I get to Canada, I'm like, okay, I'm in Canada. I can be Canadian now. And in fact, we went to a really lovely birthday the other day, which was spread over a few days with loads of Canadian people. I was like, I'm Canadian now. And whereas my accent completely changed. I mean, I've been living here for over 30 years, but it was because in the first 5 years, all my workmates used to tease me about my accent and used to make jokes about coming from the colonies and how we're so uneducated. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to probably live here for the rest of my life. I don't think I can take this for the rest of my life. I'm just going to fit in. And so I sound really English now, but that is probably slightly protective because then it's easier just to become one of the crowd. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, but everything is different. The humor, particularly what people say, how they speak, what people find funny. Very different.
Can I ask for an example?
Oh, I'm known as I'm known as a person who kills a joke in this family. So I'm not a good person to ask for a joke. But I would say that my husband, whom I love very much, is he's incredibly witty in a really English way. Just he can make a very understated, slightly ironic joke out of nothing, and play on words or just something and be really, really funny. Canadian humor is a bit more obvious. So it's a bit more sarcasm and a bit more, so it's just very different and it takes a little bit of time to adjust. And even the speed at which people literally speak more quickly in England than they do in Canada.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah, much more quickly. Canadian people speak more slowly and they enunciate.
Oh, I'm going, but is that so you're from Vancouver? Is that just Vancouver?
I'm from Vancouver.
Montreal is Montreal the same? Because when I went to Montreal and Toronto, I haven't been to Vancouver yet. So I've been to Toronto and Montreal. Toronto, I felt more like a bit of New York for some reason, but a friendlier, much more loving New York. And Montreal felt very jazzy, very quick, very, creative. But I didn't really explore.
It could be because Vancouver's the West Coast and it is the West Coast. So people are a bit more laid back. They're a bit chilled out. They're just relaxed. They don't talk very quickly. They're just really nice. They're really lovely. It's one of the loveliest places in the world to live. And the people are just really, really nice. I think the last time I was there, I was crossing a road and a bus stopped for me. So it's just one of those places. Nice things happen. People are just randomly nice to you.
My mom and dad, they were flying during 9/11 from Hong Kong back to LA. And I remember cell phones were just new. So luckily my dad had one because we were doing a lot of international business. And it was so sad, but they rerouted all the flights to Vancouver. So when we went to Vancouver, all the flights were there. And it was a bit sad because on the runway, he switched on the phone. I called him and I had to tell him the news. And then he had people on the flight because he had phone. People were trying to contact their families in New York. So that was just painful.
Oh, gosh.
But what my mom and my dad said when they got to Vancouver, the people were so wonderful, so beautiful that they kept them feeling like a safe haven and that they felt very protected, very cared for in that moment. But the moment they left to hit the United States, they went into chaotic mindset. They were like, it was just anger and a lot of like pain stuff going on. So they had a struggle coming back. But from when they were in Vancouver, they said the people, and they always said that, they said, if it wasn't for the people, if it wasn't for Vancouver, that bridge was such a warmth that we all needed to be nurtured, because some of the families that find out they were in, some of their family members were in the Twin Tower. So it's interesting, but that's my vision or my memory of desire to go to Vancouver, because that's how my mom and dad painted it.
I hope you get there one day. I'm not going to disagree. I think Canadian people in general, and I mean, I know Vancouver, so people in Vancouver just are, the natural starting point is to be friendly. Whereas sometimes you get to certain countries and the natural starting point is to be suspicious. But in Canada, the natural starting point is to be friendly. So, can I help you? Are you okay? What can I do for you? Smile. And so those very small interactions that we have with people every day, if you have like 3 or 4 interactions before the middle of the day where someone smiles at you for no reason or does something randomly nice. I remember one time we were in the car park with the kids and I'd forgotten to bring any money. I didn't have any money to put into the meter. Or credit card. And this young couple next to me said, we'll pay for you. Don't worry. It's fine. We'll pay for it. And so that keeps you on a high for the rest of the day to have somebody you don't know, you'll never see them again probably. Just do something really lovely out of the kindness of their heart. And so I feel you get quite a few interactions like that in Vancouver. It's smaller than London, obviously. London's a huge city. And I think for a huge city, people do pretty well. People are generally pretty polite and pretty kind. But Vancouver's just a bit slower, it's smaller, and you do get those interactions quite often. And so I think that in and of itself puts people into a good mood.
I mean, it would definitely put me in a good mood. I like that. I think there's nothing more enjoyable than waking up and having a smile on your face and making someone else say, today is going to be all right because we met. That's how I am, Today is going to be okay because we met. And I think that's gorgeous. So if you had to honor your parents, I always like to ask this question. What would you love to say that is their legacy passed to you today?
Oh, gosh. I couldn't say enough, so I'll say very little. I'll just say that hopefully anything good in me has come from them. They've given me love and the strength and the courage to try and be as good a person as I can be. They've showed me what being selfless looks like. They've showed me what being ambitious looks like. They showed me what being able to navigate challenging times has looked like. I would say that any time when I'm thinking, I really need some help with this, I think about them and I think, okay, I can do this. It's fine. They've given me the tools to be able to deal with life. And like, you know as well as I do, and with our family histories too, and with, certainly with my own life, there have been some really big challenges. And sometimes they feel insurmountable. They feel really, we think in our capacity as humans, how can we get through this? How can we even survive this? Not even physically, emotionally. So you need to have that inner strength. And I think if you are lucky enough to have parents who give you that self-belief, it's literally the most important tool that you have in your life. So thank you, Mum and Dad. And hopefully some of that has passed on to my kids too. So
I was going to ask you, I was like, and what is your legacy to your kids?
I think that will have to be a question that you would ask them. But the fact that just the other day, our eldest son had a big birthday and he invited his parents with amongst loads and loads of his other friends, for me is like a big pat on the back as a parent.
Yeah, you get invited to the party.
Yeah, that was a big deal, and we're lucky enough to see them a lot. They don't live at home anymore; they're adults, but we're very lucky enough to see them a lot and enjoy spending so much time with them. And it's a given that you love your kids from the day that from day dot. But it's not always a given that you like them. But I really like them a lot, and I hope the feeling is mutual.
Okay. And one thing before we end off today, one thing that you are going to take forward after we put a dot in cucumber clothing. What's that one thing that is ready for Eileen?
Well, actually, there's so many things that I want to do. But one thing I would really like to do, aside from the creativity, aside from growing East Asian Girl Gang, all of that, those are all things that are going to go carry on. But one thing I would really like to do is I'd like to do a proper investigation and write something. Doesn't need to be a book. It can just be something very personal, personal family history, because just as with your parents, their lives reflected the very turbulent external geopolitical events that were going on during their lifetimes. As with mine, my mother's, her parents, where they moved, how they moved, her life, my father's life, what happened to him, where he ended up. And also my husband, there's this enormous family as well. And the fact that we met it's not only a personal, and obviously I find very moving and interesting history, it also reflects all these huge, turbulent geopolitical events that were going on in the world in the 20th century. So for me, I'd really like to do that. And that would be a real labor of love. And as my written and reading Japanese is pretty appalling, I'd need some help with that in terms of the Japanese side. But that is something I'd really like to do.
So your next trip to Japan is going to be actually quite a big moment for you in your life, sounds like.
Yes, and we haven't been for a very, very long time. So it'd be nice just to take in the atmosphere, because every country is so different. And when you arrive somewhere, just like I think I said to you, we just went to India for the first time. My husband's doing a PhD on India, and he didn't actually do any research there, but just being there, just seeing things and experiencing this country, the flavors and the smells and everything, it adds an extra dimension to your understanding of a culture. So that's what I hope to get out from that trip.
So, Eileen, thank you. Such a wealth of knowledge. I really want to thank you for opening up and sharing.
Well, Kirti, thank you so much for inviting me, because I wouldn't have been able to share anything without your invitation. And beyond everything else, I'm just delighted that our paths have crossed, because it's always such a pleasure to make a new friend at any stage of life, particularly once you leave school, university, and your first place of work, life gets busy. It's harder to really expand. And yeah, it's been really great. So thank you so much. And I'd love to come back.
Yes.
And there you go. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and do share it out with anybody who would find this conversation insightful and useful.